You're going to be blown away by this next interview I got. J.B. Handley is infamous. I worked on the Doctors television show. You may remember the moment J.B. and the Doctors went like this.
We do not need that many vaccines that we need. The chickenpox, I think, can be a parent's choice. The rotavirus, the flu shot that still contains mercury. J.B., hepatitis B, go ahead. Wait,
the devil is always in the details, and one of the problems with vaccines is they've been so great that people overly generalize about them as if they're only great. We looked at other first world countries. We're 34th in under 5 mortality behind such luminaries as Cuba and Slovenia. However, we have 36 vaccines. The top 5, which include countries like Finland, Norway, Iceland, average 11 and 13 vaccines. From 1990 forward, we added 8 vaccines to our schedule. There are vaccines like flu, rotavirus, varicella that have only been picked up by 2 or 3 of the other 30 countries. So what do they know that we don't? Why aren't they picking up vaccines that have been around for 15 years? And why are their autism rates 1 in 1,000, 1 in 1,500, 1 in 2,000? It doesn't take a brain surgeon or an ER doctor to figure out there might be a correlation.
In my opinion, and this is just me wanting to have an open debate about this, vaccines are really the one thing we have looked at as causing autism.
That is completely bogus. That is such a bogus statement. How many vaccines have they looked at in these studies? How many? What's the answer? It's 2. How many ingredients have they studied of 35? What's the answer? It's 1. You've looked at 2 of 36 shots and 1 of 35 vaccines, and you're going to stand on the stage and say that vaccines and autism are unrelated? It is the most bogus tobacco science. It's a smokescreen, and anybody who takes the time to read it would agree. I'm so sick of doctors who don't read the studies, who don't know the details, sitting here telling parents and reassuring them that vaccines don't cause autism. It is irresponsible.
And this is the biggest problem, and the reason that doctors in this country are frustrated.
Read the
because,
science.
Listen, all you're doing is you're antagonizing a medical community that wants to help these kids.
You haven't done the research.
You're antagonizing me. You're antagonizing Dr. Sears. Why would you do that? This show is all about my son. Okay, you know, and okay, everyone wants to blame someone, right? Yes. This is what we're trying to figure out here is how to help kids. But all you do when you yell at me on my stage, all you do is anger me.
I mean, all you do is antagonize me. We're trying to help. We want to help by doing one thing. We just want to not look at vaccines. What's wrong with you? Why can't we just avoid looking at vaccines? You're making me so upset here because you want to talk about the one thing hundreds of thousands of parents around the world all witnessed with their own eyes, and we're not doing that here. Them's fighting words. JB started this whole thing. JB, are you with me?
I'm with you, man. I'm with you.
I mean, I think that, you know, if there are aliens out there, I believe that clip will be one that will be watched over and over and over again by aliens too. It's fantastic. But let's
we can only hope.
You have been tracking really you have a blog, J.B. Handley. You've been tracking one scientist, really, for the last couple of years. It's this guy, how do you say it, Dr. Xiaobin?
I'm going with
Yao.
Yao.
Okay. Now, I read a study you put out, one of his studies recently, that he's been looking at hepatitis B vaccine, and he's using mice in a study. You just came out with another one. You've got a brand new study that you wrote about in your blog. It blew my mind. I keep thinking this guy has done it. He has sealed the case. It is clear that vaccines are causing problems. This one's called New Study. Hep B vaccine may have adverse implications for brain development. Oh, what was the name of the study, though? It's IL-4 mediates the delayed neurobehavioral impairments induced by neonatal hepatitis B vaccination that involves the downregulation of the IL-4 receptor in the hippocampus. That's the title. There it is, folks. I'm not lying. We've got to work on these guys' titles a little bit. But anyway, tell us about this study. Take me a little bit through the path that Yao has made through. This is his third sort of iteration of this study. What gets you here?
So, Del, first off, I think it's worth noting that Dr. Yao is a University of Pittsburgh educated doctor. He's back in China. He and his laboratory have done 3 mice studies that have all included the hepatitis B vaccine. The studies were done in 2015, 2016, and 2018. While the 2018 study is important, I'm actually going to focus on the 2016 study for a moment because it's even more important in my opinion.
Okay.
By the way, my blog is jbhandleyblog.com. But if you go to my Facebook page right now, which is just JB Handley, my public page, I put up links to all these studies there right at the top of the page for people to take a look at for themselves. The hepatitis B study in 2016 was the study we would all hope for. They took a group of mice and gave them hepatitis B vaccine, and they took a group of mice and gave them a saline placebo, and then they measured their brains later on to see if there were differences. And in the meantime, they measured their behaviors for cognition and socialization and other things. And they made some startling and devastating conclusions. They concluded that there was a major change in the chemistry of the brains that showed a massive uptick in certain cytokines. Cytokines are inflammatory markers from the immune system, which if you find them in the brain, we know that autism and certain cytokines are closely related. I'll explain why in a moment. And so there was a dramatic difference between the mice who'd gotten hepatitis B and the mice who'd gotten saline. But Del, I think the other thing that they discovered that is so critical that I wrote the word down. It's latency. Okay. Latency. And latency, I think, should be the death knell to the hepatitis B vaccine. And it should be the death knell to the current structure of how vaccines are monitored for safety. And let me kind of explain this. What became clear was that there was a delay in terms of when the neurological disorders appeared in the mice. They weren't always immediate. And we have both kinds of stories amongst parents. We have parents who have these dramatic stories where their children like fell off a cliff right after a vaccine appointment. And we have others where there's sort of this gradual decline from the initial vaccines, and then they get the autism diagnosis when they're like 5 years old. What we know with certainty, Del, is that a hepatitis B vaccine is only studied for up to a week in the safety trials, right? And then it's not acknowledged that a vaccine can cause autism. So if you have a latency period, then you can have an epidemic hiding in plain sight, right? Because there's no official acknowledged way for that. People who have a child who ends up with a learning disability at 5 years old, who got hepatitis B vaccine when they were 6 months old, is not going to report that to theirs because no one's ever alerted them that that's a possibility. But now what we see unequivocally is that those neurological disorders can show up later. And let me explain what's so interesting about that. Hepatitis B vaccine is now becoming one of the most studied singular vaccines we have because we have very little research on any of them. The work that the Chinese scientists are doing is unequivocal biological evidence that the vaccine can cause brain damage. But people have forgotten about the Goodman and Gallagher studies from the late 2000s, which I posted on my Facebook page as well, where they're at SUNY Stony Brook and they looked at hepatitis B vaccine series and special education rates and hepatitis B vaccine series and autism rates and found dramatic differences in boys between those who had gotten the series and those who hadn't. That would capture the latency period that that Yao has found, and he does reference the Goodman-Gallagher work, and it's really, really important. And Del, what I would explain to you is that you have scientists in China who are funded by the Chinese government because pharma doesn't control China the way it controls the United States. They're doing legitimate biological research, which is the same kind of research that we did on tobacco, which showed that tobacco caused tumors and ultimately lung cancer. We have Goodman and Gallagher's epidemiology very clearly doing vax on Hep B and showing dramatic differences in rates. And then we have to take a step back. We have a disease, hepatitis B, which is a devastating disease that I would never want my children to have. That's a very serious illness, but it has incredibly low communicability, okay? In fact, I posted on my Facebook page as well something from the Oregon Health Authority about what it takes to actually get hepatitis B, because I get into arguments with some doctors who say, oh, well, it could come from the same water fountain or it could come from the same food, but it couldn't. You know, you have to basically like cut yourself, cut the other person and put your arms together. You have to have sex or you have to share a needle. Those are really the only ways it can be transmitted from one person to another. And so what I would say, Del, is that between the science from China, between the Goodman and Gallagher work, and between the low communicability, unless you are a carrier of hepatitis B, a mother, you would be insane as a parent to get that vaccine for your child right now. And I talked to Paul Thomas about that, who's a pediatrician here in Portland, who has the largest practice in Portland. And, you know, he doesn't give Hep B to any of his patients. And I asked him, you know, he's been practicing for 25 years. Have you ever seen a case of hepatitis B? And this was, you know, he was practicing before they even had the vaccine for it. He said, no, not one case. So we have to
Right.
not, we have to put things in context.
Right. Risk, health, like,
That's
you know,
just it.
right.
I use the example like Ebola. I don't want my children to have Ebola. I don't want to have Ebola, but I'm not feeling bad that there's no Ebola vaccine or that we haven't gotten it, because everything is a risk reward. And when you look at this unequivocal research, and by the way, Dr. Yao, I actually emailed the guy to ask him questions before I write these studies. I never hear from the dude. Like, he's not part of the anti-vax community. He never responds to me, which is fine, Dr. Yao, if you're watching. You know, it's all good. I'm still going to write about your studies. This is not somebody who can in any way be viewed as being part of our community. He has nothing to do with our community. He's doing these studies, and I pointed out in my article that I just wrote about the new study, which is really more confirmatory, because they injected mice with cytokines and with the vaccine to see if they get the same reaction, and they did. And so what they did was they isolated the mechanism that they think is causing the brain injury, and that's really important.
They want to move past just like, well, magically we just know we give this injection, we're seeing these issues later. They're really looking at the brain now and saying, well, what is the injection doing? In this case, the IL-4 cytokines and receptors are being affected, and by showing
what they're saying is,
like this, yeah, go ahead.
They know that the IL-4 cytokine is a biomarker for brain damage. They affirmed it by just injecting a mice with IL-4 and injecting them with Hep B and basically seeing the same outcome. And, you know, to build on something that Brian Hooker was saying earlier, Del, I think that we know with certainty that immune activation events cause autism. I think what we don't know with certainty is the scale of the triggers, okay? So you trigger an immune activation event, and then the immune activation event causes the autism, right? So what are the triggers? Well, we know with certainty that the aluminum adjuvant is a trigger, and now we appear to know with certainty that the hepatitis B vaccine is a trigger. Now, we don't know which ingredient exactly, or if the combination is more toxic or whatever, but what I would say with certainty is that if this were any other like consumer product given to infants, the totality of the science through 5 studies, right? 3 by Yao and 2 by Goodman and Gallagher, would be enough to at least create an immediate need for, you know, all the interested parties to get together and discuss this problem. And again, in light of the very limited risk of transmissibility of hepatitis B, you know, I really encourage parent activists to start beating the drum in the state houses, because the federal government appears so compromised on this issue, to beg your state representatives to remove this vaccine from the schedule, and to ask pediatricians in each state to stop giving it until somebody can go through those 5 studies and compare that to communicability and explain why they think the risk reward for this particular vaccine is worth it, because I don't think there's a case to be made for it.
There isn't. I think it's the stupidest vaccine there is. The aluminum load alone is just off the charts. It's insane. It's given to day 1 old babies, which is the most fragile time in your entire life. That first day of life. Why are we injecting them? They're a developing brain, as you pointed out, just like AIDS. Are you worried your child's going to get AIDS the day they're born? No, you're not. Same type of disease. You can only get it sharing needles, sharing prostitutes.
And Del,
you know,
I just want to be super clear about this. The one thing that is different about hepatitis B right now from really any other vaccine is the weight of published scientific evidence. Now, I'm not saying that if you took other vaccines through this same rigorous approach of a saline placebo and that vaccine in mice, that you wouldn't get the same results. Maybe you would, but we now have unassailable evidence.
We have the evidence that should have been done. It's the evidence that should have been done on every single one of these vaccines before they were ever put on the market. We are finally getting to a place where we're seeing one vaccine finally coming under scrutiny from a good scientist that's saying, hey, let's do what we do on drugs. Let's inject this into some mice and see what happens. Oh, lo and behold, neurological disorders. Is it safe to say, am I going on a limb if I say, based on Yao's studies, hepatitis B can destroy or cause neurological disorders in the brains of mammals?
It's been established that it can biologically cause brain damage, and I would argue that that should be enough to pull the vaccine. Right? I can't just substitute any other product on the planet product blank found to cause brain damage in mice, comma, and we're currently giving to children. It would be removed pretty much across the board, except for vaccines.
Except because guys like Dr. Travis Stork will scream and yell and have a hissy fit by even having to be asked to have that conversation. That type of bias is why we find ourselves in such a dangerous position in this country. We should not have science and doctors and people that are working with our children that have such a bias. Why is CNN not covering this? Why is no one in our media covering a major science from one of the top universities in China? Why is no one talking about it?
Well, and I think that's something that maybe people don't appreciate. Science, with the exception of studies that exonerate vaccines, are not supported by PR firms at all. These guys are just publishing their work kind of in a vacuum in China, trying to figure out what's wrong with all the Chinese children who are succumbing to these neurological disorders. They don't have Hill and Knowlton, the big PR firm who Big Pharma employs on the vaccine autism issue. You know, I think about the Tozzi study back in 2009 from Italy, which was like this horrible study looking at kids who got more mercury versus less. And it was on the front page of every newspaper in America because Big Pharma has a very, very well-crafted propaganda and PR machine, and these guys don't. But that doesn't mean that our health authorities shouldn't be held to the standard of reviewing any science that comes across the transom in whatever form that seems to implicate product being given to children as causing brain damage. And I'll go back. I actually have started using this term, Del. I think it's the grand miscalculation. I want to give early vaccine pioneers the benefit of the doubt that they did what they did to help children.
I agree.
But the grand miscalculation is that risk-reward trade-off being all screwed up. And the AB study out of Africa, where they showed that these non-specific effects of DTP vaccine were actually causing way more deaths than they were helping. This is the grand miscalculation. It's, to me, the ultimate argument around whether or not to use any one vaccine is a mathematical argument. It's a mathematical argument of the benefits versus the risks of that vaccine. But we can't do the math without the data. And if you study something for 4 days and then VAERS doesn't capture it, it takes biological evidence like this to prove that there is brain damage and there's a latency period. And to me, it makes the math have to be redone. And I'm telling you, in the case of hepatitis B, because of the low transmissibility, there just can't be a reasonable argument that that's a risk reward that the average parent should take. Now, if you're a mother with hepatitis B, it's a totally different story.
Right.
But that's a very small percentage.
I want to jump in here really quick. We're way over time, but as I said, you know, I'm still going to be talking with Bobby Kennedy. We're going to talk about this lawsuit that we've just won. But really quickly, and I don't know if you saw this, but I saw that there's a review of the WHO has just tried to change the guidelines on what they're going to call an injury from vaccines. And there's also these two scientists that are complaining about it. This is sort of what the headline was. Under WHO's revised manual on AEFI, only those adverse reactions observed during clinical trials of a vaccine should be classified as vaccine-related. All new serious adverse reactions, including deaths seen during post-marketing of the vaccine, should be considered as coincidental or unclassifiable, and the vaccine should not be blamed. Now, I think that there's a real review of the World Health Organization trying to move to this. I've heard that they may be now revising it, but the fact that this is what they're trying to do, that they're trying to limit what we call a vaccine injury to what we saw in trials, which, as we've all pointed out, hepatitis B, 4-day trial for one of the versions and 5 days. So if you're injured on day 6, this thing is saying we will never, ever, ever call that an injury. So they're going to do away. So we have no pre-licensing safety testing, which Bobby Kennedy and I have proved that that's not going on. And now you're going to take away the only thing that we have, which is surveillance after the fact, people being injured. I just played a video from ACIP where they're knowingly putting out a hepatitis B vaccine for adults that killed 14 people with heart attacks in the trials, you know? And they're saying to the panel, let's see how it does. Let's look at the surveillance in 3 or 4 years and see how that does. Well, the World Health Organization is just saying, we're not going to look at it. We don't care about post-surveillance. We are not going to look what happens in the population. I mean, and this is the World Health Organization, J.B. Are the lunatics running the asylum, or what's going on?
There is a disturbing ideology, because it is an ideology. There's not logic employed. that when it comes to vaccines, the benefits always outweigh the risks. And the lengths they'll go to maintain that mantra are pretty disturbing. And how anybody can look at that and recognize latency periods and not see how contrived that would be to narrow the definition like that. I mean, that's just profoundly dishonest. And it's not science at all. It's not trying to capture the reality of what's happening in the world. It's gravely disappointing. And I think there's a lot of public health officials who are far more crooked and dishonest than any business person I've ever seen. I mean, as a business person, I just remain mystified sometimes by moves like that. And it's deeply, deeply disturbing.
Well, JB, I love the fact that you're out there when mainstream media is not. jbhandleyblog.com, is that right? If we want to read your articles that you're writing, jbhandleyblog.com. Keep up the great work. Of course, you are working with, you know, great groups like Generation Rescue and others. You're out there. You've been in this fight for a long time. I want to thank you for your work and and my heart goes out to your family, as many of the people, as Brian pointed out today. We're talking to the autism dads. It's great to have you on the show. Keep up the good work. We'll talk to you soon. All right.
Thank you very much, Del.
All right. Great.